Dr. Elizabeth Ford has been the Chief of Psychiatry for Correctional Health Services for New York City's health and hospitals for the past 4 years, and is responsible for the mental health care of men and women incarcerated in the New York City jails, including Rikers Island. Formerly the Director of the Division of Forensic Psychiatry at Bellevue Hospital, the Training Director for the New York University School of Medicine's Forensic Psychiatry Fellowship, she has spent years specializing in the treatment of individuals with serious mental illness in the criminal justice system. Dr. Ford is also an adjunct associate professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and teaches and writes extensively about a broad array of topics related to the interface of mental health, law, and correction settings, including the mental health impact of incarceration. She has authored and co-authored numerous academic articles and books, including a textbook about the significant U.S. legal cases related to psychiatry and the law, and the latest edition of the American Psychiatric Association's guidelines regarding psychiatric services in jails and prisons. Her most recent book, a memoir entitled Sometimes Amazing Things Happen, Heartbreak and Hope of the Bellevue Hospital Psychiatric Prison Ward, was published in 2017. Dr. Ford has appeared on national radio and television, including NPR's Fresh Air and Comedy Central's The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and Time Magazine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Ford.
Thank you very much. I don't want to talk now. I just want to listen to the prior speakers. And Bria, I could listen to you talk for the rest of my life. It's extraordinarily powerful to hear you speak. So I hope that you continue with your writing and your sharing of your experiences. It's really. It could be life-changing, really, for people to hear, so thank you very much for sharing that. And I also, a bit of a disclaimer, which I've told the people sitting next to me, I do have a cold and a cough, which I will try to contain, but I cannot promise that, so I will periodically move away. Thank you again for inviting me here. I have a marital connection to the American Group Psychotherapy Association. My husband who is also a psychiatrist, has been deeply involved in that organization for many, many years. And I have recently become used to his many weekends and weeks away from home doing his group psychotherapy work, and was initially a little annoyed by it, but actually it's been helping him and our family life a great deal. So I'm really grateful, so thank you. I thought today I'd do a little bit of sort of talking and speaking and read some passages from the book. I want to make sure that I touch on some of the things that I think are important for this particular audience. I do tend to go off on tangents and wax philosophical and sometimes get on a bit of a soapbox, and that's not always the best approach. I get that, so I'm going to try to contain those things. And hopefully we'll have some discussion and questions afterwards, because that's, I think, where all the best stuff happens. So this is a tough topic to discuss. I am aware of the many disparate and sometimes completely opposite views that people have about concepts like mass incarceration and the criminal justice system, and also about mental illness. So that certainly has not escaped the public debate and the very strong feelings people have pro, con, anyway about that. And the country still exists in a space where mental illness is profoundly stigmatized. I happen to work in a city where it's less stigmatized, so New York City is like a hotbed of psychiatrists. There seem to be one on every block, and people speak openly about their therapy. But I'm aware that that's not the case in most areas of this country, which I think is a shame. I think we also struggle as a society to think, actually I know we struggle to think about our collective view on punishment and accountability and how we should, or if we should, punish people for behavior that we deem inappropriate or criminal in some way, and how to think about that. I don't know the right answer to that. Just a little bit of background, I wasn't raised in this country. I came to college in the US, and so I wasn't, I sort of come at American culture from a slightly different perspective. But I think it's clear to me that we haven't agreed on what we think of human behavior and how to deal with the stuff that we don't like. And that's a discussion that needs to happen openly. And it's a tough one to do. So I will do my best, but I know that not everyone here is going to agree with me. Sometimes I don't agree with myself all the time, and I'm searching for what I think is the right answer to stuff. Everyone in this room has very different experiences, and that's absolutely okay. I just hope that you can hear what I say coming from a trying to figure out what's best and right perspective rather than knowing, because I don't know. I don't know, and I struggle with that every day. And I hope that there can be more of a transparent dialogue so that everyone's opinion can be heard and valued. And I would argue that sort of in our political world, that would be a nice thing as well. So, here we go. We'll see what happens. A little bit of a history lesson, and I will tell you that I was not alive for most of this history. But a talk like this can't really proceed without some background about how we may have come to the situation that we're in now with respect to the mass incarceration of individuals with mental illness. In my opinion, it's not the result of one thing. Deinstitutionalization, so closing of state hospitals because of the Community Mental Health Act in the mid-60s, is the thing most often cited. I actually think, based on sort of the dynamics of the country and also, frankly, the patients that I still see who are incarcerated, it's really a function of drug policy. And the initiation of the, quote, war on drugs also in the late 60s, but really sort of ramped up in the late 70s, early 80s. And the impact of those laws and those sentencing guidelines on individuals with mental illness was profound. So substance use and mental illness basically go hand in hand. Also a profound impact on minority populations, on Black and brown people. And those sentences were years to life. And we heard a couple of examples just prior. And I think that was quite pivotal. The other thing that is not frequently mentioned is that the laws shifted in the mid-70s to make it so that it was much harder for people to get into the hospitals that did exist. So the state hospitals were closing at the same time what are called civil commitment laws. So the right of a doctor to force a patient into a hospital. In the mid-70s, that shifted from the best interest of the patient to the best interest of the patient, plus they have to be acutely dangerous. And that gets interpreted all sorts of ways. And in all different, and based on the states, they have different statutes around it. But it required to get into a hospital, you had to be at high risk or have tried to hurt yourself or to hurt somebody else. That's a very high bar to get into a hospital. And in my opinion, hospitals do the best work when they allow people admission before they get to that point, right, to prevent that. But we need to do, I think, some sort of backtracking a little bit in that regard. So all of that is sort of happening. We haven't settled, as I mentioned, on our thoughts about punishment versus rehabilitation. I mean, what are jails and prisons actually for? It's not shocking. I'm going to argue for rehabilitation. Punishment is not generally a great way to change people's behavior. It just isn't. And the psychologists in the room probably know that. And as a parent, I definitely learned that early on. And then we're faced with, I think in addition, we're faced with the real misconception that all people with mental disorders are dangerous. Boy, that's the thing I hear very frequently. It is absolutely not true. I'm sure everybody in this room knows that. But the World Health Organization recently said, which I think is totally accurate, that we have a general intolerance of difficult or disturbing behavior. And I'm not talking about serious violence. I'm just talking about somebody on a street corner talking to themselves, or a person in the subway who hasn't showered for a while and is homeless, or someone who's urinating on the sidewalk because they're homeless and they don't have a toilet to get to. I mean, that's the kind of behavior that, at least in my experience in New York City, frequently leads to arrest. And I think we should wonder, is that really something that is a serious enough threat to public safety that we need to incarcerate that person? So I've been a psychiatrist for almost 20 years, which that feels great, because for much of my career I've sort of been like, maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about, but somehow I feel like at 20 years I've seen enough that I can form some educated opinions about things. But I specialize in taking care of patients who have difficult and disturbing behavior. I don't see them unless that has already happened. And that work has been done in the New York City jail system for the duration of my career. Rikers Island is the most notorious part of that system. But for most of my career, I was actually at Bellevue. It's the largest public hospital in New York City, and the 19th floor is dedicated to taking care of patients in the jail who are sick enough that they need to be in the hospital. So New York City is relatively unique in the sense that the jail has access to general hospital units for patients who need that kind of care. I actually don't know what happens in the Rochester jail here, or if there's an equivalent, but most jail settings don't send patients to the hospital. They have an infirmary type thing in the jail, or they, in a really paradoxical and sort of unbelievable twist, place patients who are suicidal in solitary confinement. And so in New York City, we have access to hospitals, and that I think is excellent. That's where I did most of my training. It's where I learned some of the most helpful and meaningful interactions for these patients. Have nothing to do with my medical degree. Like it is less about finding the right medication or the right diagnosis, although that's important. But it's much more about just being in the space with your patient and listening to them and seeing them and recognizing their humanity, looking them in the eye, shaking hands. I mean, doing things that you would do with another human being. Okay, thanks. But this is not rocket science at all. It is definitely not like what I was taught in medical school. There's no question. But I learned that has a bigger impact on that person's health and on their ability to engage with me as their doctor than like anything else I had tried. I was trained, NYU is a pretty analytic type frame, and I was trained, I knew I wasn't going to become an analyst, but I was trained in that. And for better or worse, taught about neutrality and not to let the transference and the countertransference get too much. But it wasn't working. It wasn't working, I think, for my character, and it wasn't working for interactions with these patients that really, they needed something from me. They needed a human person to interact with because, for the most part, in the settings where I work, they've been deprived of that. So I try to have that approach with all my patient interactions. I will tell you, it is a daily practice, like meditation. It is almost a one day at a time thing. I am always in the back of my head thinking, am I treating this person the way I would want to be treated? Am I doing that? And sometimes I'm not. I have empathic failures all the time. We'll talk about the stressors that happen in these settings. But it's been pretty freeing to just acknowledge that I'm not going to do it right all the time. And it's been helpful even with patient care. Sometimes I'll be like, you know what, I wish I hadn't said that to you. I am very sorry. This is what was going through my head. I've had this happened just before we met. Something to explain to that individual that it is in fact not them that I am frustrated with. It is the setting, it's the situation, it's something else that's going on. So it's really allowed me to be in this work for 20 years. I feel less alone, I feel less helpless, and I definitely feel less hopeless. So I started at Bellevue, but actually for the past 4.5 years, and I think this will be I think I'll probably be there for the rest of my career, but I've worked in the New York City jail system proper. So I left the hospital and work as I run the mental health service in the jail system, and I work for an organization called Correctional Health Services, which it sounds like a bureaucratic organization, but it's really just a piece of the public health system in New York City, which is an important thing to remember because, and this started in 2016 as a result of a lot of advocacy, but the jail healthcare is actually part of the whole New York City public health system, which means that we're linked into the medical records. We can share doctors across the borders. We can have access to clinics upon reentry. It's a really important connection, and I think if jails and community organizations are not linked in some very clear way, it makes it very hard to have any sort of continuity of care for patients. If you're in an outpatient clinic and your patient gets arrested, what happens? Actually, I mean, I don't know what happens here. I'll tell you what, in New York, it used to be, the patients, I don't know, they're gone. I don't know where they are. They're not showing up for their appointment. You find out they're in jail. All right, well, I won't see them. Either I won't see them again because the clinic won't take them back, or I won't see them again because I'm too scared, or I won't see them again because they're not going to come back to care. But either way, they're not my patient anymore. And then on the jail side, for the longest time, it was, we have no idea what's going on with this person in the community. And that lack of communication across those bars is really detrimental to patients. So I think that they do need to be part. It's an important thing to remember that progressive change happened a couple of years ago. Little note about the scope of the jail. New York City is no longer the largest jail system in the country. Yay! It's still huge, though. We're third instead of first. There are 8,000 people who are incarcerated there on any given day. LA and Cook County are ahead of us. And then Harris County, Houston, is number 4. That's probably not shocking. It's very isolated. The Rikers Island, which has 8 of the jails, is very isolated. There's a tiny little bridge, 1 lane, that gets you on and off the island. Very hard to visit for families. Attorneys struggle to get there to see their clients. Reentry services are very challenging. So it's a testament to how sticking something really far away makes the services inside really challenging to deliver. And is not necessary also. By the way, the city is moving the jail off Rikers Island, which is, I think, a great thing. So of the 8,000 people who are there, about 40% are part of the mental health service. That doesn't necessarily mean they have mental illness. We have broadened our definition of who gets treated on the mental health service from one of you have to be diagnosed with a formal DSM diagnosis to there's some kind of mental health impact happening to you while you're here in this jail. And we're not going to assign you a diagnosis, but we're going to try to help you at least get through the experience. And of the 40%, of the 8,000, 16% are diagnosed as serious mental illness. And I don't like that, I mentioned earlier today, I don't like the name serious because if you have a mental illness and you're suffering, it's pretty serious. It doesn't matter what it is. But there are classifications of illnesses that basically depend on medication requirements, and is there a high chance that you'll be hospitalized if you have that illness. Things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are frequently considered serious mental illness. We're the first jail that I'm aware of in the country to define post-traumatic stress disorder also as a serious mental illness, because in our population, you can acquire PTSD because of the setting, but also that setting makes pre-existing post-traumatic stress disorder much worse. And it's also very hard to treat. It's like treating trauma in the midst of trauma. I don't know how to actually do that. So speaking of trauma, what does trauma do to a person? We've talked about the school system, and I know the teachers in the audience have witnessed the effects of trauma in children. And it affects adults as well, but things, not mental illness, but like reduced attention, irritability, anger, trouble learning, a lack of trust, not being able to sleep, skipping school, and sometimes mental illness. But trauma is especially chronic and persistent, affects a human mind and a body in a way that sometimes is irrecoverable. And I don't know that we acknowledge that so much. And it isn't only trauma that you might think of like physical or sexual abuse. It's also the trauma that I have witnessed and that I hear all the time, the trauma of poverty, the trauma of racism, the trauma of classism. I mean, we really, gosh, I wish that we all wanted what's best for each of us, but I don't know that that's embedded. I don't know if it's embedded in human nature. I don't think it's embedded in this country just yet. So the patients that I see are basically all poor. Very few have graduated from high school. A quarter are homeless. They almost all have substance use disorders, and very few have any family support to speak of. And so I take care of adults. If I was in a juvenile justice system, there would be a higher rate of family involvement. But by the time I see them in the jail, a lot of family relationships have been fractured if they were there to begin with. And so they also have the stigmatization of being mentally ill and being incarcerated, plus a whole bunch of other stuff. And frankly, a lot of New Yorkers, New York City-ers, I should say, they don't even know that they exist, frankly. Or if they think about them, they know only the headlines from the Post or the Daily News, which are the local tabloids there, with giant headlines like Monster and Sicko and all sorts of things that I can't read anymore, actually, because it's such a misrepresentation of the human person, regardless of what they have done. And I totally get that there are certain actions that I think for many are unforgivable. That doesn't take away their humanity, in my opinion, at all. But if you don't have personal experience in this world, or if you haven't experienced it yourself or family members, I think it's a space that most people don't really want to know about and maybe not think about. In New York City, particularly in Manhattan, there's a lot of wealth and there's a lot of disregard for the people who don't have wealth. And it can be pretty challenging. The thing is that in spite of all that trauma and all of those disadvantages, the patients are real survivors. I often think I could never make it. I could never be as strong as these patients who have endured so much and who still keep trying and who keep, it's a source of inspiration for me, certainly. And they have taught me how to be a better mother. They've taught me how to be a better wife, how to listen to my husband when he's like driving me nuts, and how to think about actually what's going on with him instead of just what's going on with me. And they've definitely taught me to be a better doctor, and I hope just sort of a better person. And I don't know that, I would never have anticipated that when I started my career, but I'm deeply grateful for it. So I think also something that I want to share with you just about the jail experience, which is different-ish from the prison experience. Jails are intended to be short-stay places, so the churn in a jail is fast, and particularly in New York City, 50,000 admissions and discharges a year. People are coming in and they're going out, and the individuals making those decisions about who comes in and who goes out are not us in the jail. It's the judges in the judicial system. So you have to be prepared at any moment, 24/7, for people to come in and to take care of them, and you have to be prepared for them to be leaving without any notice at all. So people get bailed out, the case is dismissed, they take a plea, whatever happens to the case, but it happens without the staff inside the jail knowing. And it's also, most of the time, the patients/defendants don't know what's going on either. And so the anxiety about what's going to happen to me just seeps into everything. And I have heard, and Dr. Walid, I don't know if you're going to, if you share this or not, but I have heard from countless patients, when they get sentenced, there's some relief there from the anxious stress of being in this uncertain situation. Now, the idea of going to prison is not of course, a great idea. But the fact that there's at least something known can be very helpful for a lot of the patients that I see. And they all have, they've got mental illness and they're struggling to figure out sort of where they fit already. So that sort of has a paradoxical benefit in some ways. Not as big a benefit as actually being released from the jail and not going to prison, I would say. But there are things like, so you think, when am I going to get my phone call? When am I going to get out of here? Am I going to lose my apartment? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my children? Am I going to survive? Will I get enough to eat? Like, these things that probably most people in this room don't think about that much. These are daily stressors for the patients that I see. And I think, I was thinking about this with one of the prior speakers. There's the hierarchy of need pyramid. Is that concept familiar to some folks? Okay. So you've got, in order to progress up whatever we've decided is human development up to sort of the highest thing, which is self-actualization, right? Realizing who you are and living to your full potential. You've got to hit a few benchmarks before you can get to that phase. And the very bottom of the pyramid is physiologic needs. You have to have enough food, you have to have enough water, you have to have shelter, enough clothing. And many of these patients don't have that on the outside. And in the jail, they sort of have it. But it's hard, and then the next step is safety, right? So you can't progress in your development until you've got your basic needs met, and then until you feel safe. And I have yet to be in a jail setting where anybody's progressed past that pyramid, right? And it doesn't always have to be an actual threat to your safety. You have to just feel safe. You have to feel safe that your physical self will not be harmed and that your emotional self is strong enough to progress up to, I think, love maybe the next step, and then self-esteem. And we're just struggling, right? We've gotten to the physiologic part. We're struggling in the jail for the safety part. My goal is to get everybody up to the third piece. But we'll see how that goes. So I just wanted to bring that up. It struck me in one of the earlier comments. There's no autonomy in the jail. You're told what to do, when to do it. But in my experience, and I'm told what to do and when to do it also by the officer staff, but it's not very consistent. So an officer who may like me one day will let me do something, and then the next day will not. And the same thing can happen to the patients. And it's just chaos all the time. So that kind of place we're talking about the patients a lot, excuse me. Ooh, see, there's that ugly cough. That kind of space has an impact on the individuals who work there too. And I don't want to discount the experience of the correction officers who, for the most part, take these jobs in order to be helpful. And then over the time that they're there, that sort of morphs into something that doesn't look a whole lot like help. And the health staff come in also really wanting to do good, and over time, fighting the good fight and not seeing change happen, the staff get institutionalized almost in the same way that the patients do, and sort of lose hope and become helpless and don't know anymore how to affect change. My office is in one of the jails, and there we go. And I have a couple of layers of barbed wire around my window, and one of the crazy beautiful things about that island is it sits in Flushing Bay, and you have a beautiful view of the Manhattan landscape, and the water is lapping up against the shore, and there are seagulls and ducks and little stray cats all around it. It seems, if you forget where you are, it seems sort of peaceful. But my fourth or fifth month, looked out my window and there was a seagull stuck in the barbed wire, alive. And you guys don't know me, but it made me crazy. I was deeply distraught. I ran out. I had this quick thing like, I'm just going to climb the barbed wire and get. But that's not wise. Fortunately, something stopped me. But I was panicked, deeply panicked. And so I ran to the control room, gesturing wildly. I got an officer to come out with me to look at the seagull. Okay, we'll call animal control. This happens all the time. We'll call animal control. It's like, okay. Okay, whew, so I breathe. And then the day goes by, I'm in other jails, and I come back, and the seagull is still there. And I make a fuss again and get some higher up people to come over and look at the struggling seagull and promise me again that they'll call animal control. And at this point, I don't know what else to do. So I leave. And I come back after the weekend, and the seagull has died. And over the next 3 months, I watched the seagull decay on the barbed wire outside of my office. And that experience, to me, is representative of this loss of compassion. I recognize it's a seagull, and okay, I happen to love animals, and you may say a seagull may not be that important, but there's a suffering creature there. And it was neglected in such a profound way, and that kind of stuff happens to the patients. And that's what I'm fighting against. That kind of neglect, that disregard, that looking the other way, that's the kind of stuff that if we could change, I think, in these correctional institutions, a whole lot of other stuff would change and improve. Okay, so I think I've painted a fairly dehumanizing picture, which sounds like so hopeless as I describe it, and yet let's wait, we'll hear a little of the exciting things that can happen there too. I do want to say that it's particularly challenging for young people whose brains are still developing and who are learning in this system that the only way to get through is to lie, to cheat, to extort, to steal, to fight, because you have to do those things to survive. And that doesn't fly when you get out into the community at all. And unfortunately, we have a lot of young people who are arrested and incarcerated. I'm going to read a little bit of a chapter here. Is that okay if I do a tiny little? Okay. Okay, so this is about a young man. I'm not reading the whole chapter because it'll take too long, so they'll bits and pieces. Kevin is the new guy. He has the unfortunate luck of living in only one of 2 states in the country, the other being North Carolina, where anyone 16 years of age or older is automatically charged as an adult. Postscript, that changed in 2018 for New York. Yay. He's 16, but his small, scrawny body makes him look about 12. Kevin came in from the Adolescent Reception and Detention Center, called ARDC. It's been since renamed for a former DOC chief. It houses the adolescent boys, and as I would learn years later from exposés like The Lords of Rikers and Before the Law, it is perhaps the most lawless and dangerous jail on the island. Christopher Robinson will be beaten to death there in 2008, and Khalif Browder will eventually kill himself after spending over a year in solitary confinement for a stolen backpack for which he was never found guilty. Kevin hasn't been in solitary confinement yet. The only thing on his mind today is the phone. The phone is always a problem for the jail patients at Bellevue. It is never fair and it's never easy. One of the floor officers is supposed to bring the phone and cord into the unit at 8 in the morning and make it available for patients until late in the evening. There's no cradle, it's just a long cord attached to the end of the phone. The cord plugs into the one available wall jack. By the way, the jacks are limited so that you can't insert paper clips and create cigarettes with tea bags. So there's only one available wall jack, so it can be removed at the end of the day and it won't be used as a weapon. Whenever the phone is in use, an officer is usually standing a couple feet away, making sure that the caller isn't turning the cord into a noose. Each patient is supposed to get 1 6-minute personal call and 1 attorney phone call per day. And unlike at Rikers Island, where the phone automatically clicks off when time is up, at Bellevue, the officers are responsible for keeping time, which is important when you think that if the officer likes you, you'll get more time, and if the officer doesn't like you, you may not get any. I find Kevin staring out the window at the glistening United Nations building up the river. He has one big, expressive eye that opens wide with fear and scrunches when he tries to laugh. I can't see the other eye because it's sealed shut with swollen and bruised skin. "Oh my goodness," I exclaim. "What happened?" He turns his face away and doesn't respond. I wait there, figuring that he will talk when he's ready. Eventually, Kevin turns to me and starts to giggle. Are you gonna ask me anything else, Doc, or just stand there staring at me? And that seems kind of weird. I smile in relief. I have a million questions for you, I reply. You want to talk someplace more private, or are you okay in here? Here's good. I just don't want to go back in there, he says, motioning back to the unit. I nod and begin. How about we start with why you ended up in the hospital? You tell me. I didn't come in here. I was just minding my business when they threw me on the bus and sent me over. Seriously, I stick to myself over there, referring to the jail. Were you seeing a doctor at Rikers, I ask? A psychiatrist, maybe? Yeah, I went to the clinic sometimes, he slowly replies, but they just kept asking me the same dumb questions. Shit, oh, can I swear? Okay. It's sort of become part of my daily language. Shit, like, was I thinking of killing myself, and how was I sleeping? That is a waste of time. Like, I'm gonna talk about any of that. Well, when was the last time you went to that clinic? He shrugs his shoulders and looks down again. Hey, don't worry, I say, you're here now, that's good. So first up though, let's figure out what's going on with your eye. Does it hurt? He nods silently. When did it happen? It doesn't matter, he mumbles. It ain't nothing. I don't know, I say. I've seen a lot of black eyes, and that one looks pretty bad. At this point, I can spot an orbital fracture a mile away. The bruising and swelling masks the broken, fragile bones that protect the eyeball. A lot of my patients have these microfractures, either coming in with them following a use of force at Rikers or after a fight with another patient. I'm going to order an x-ray just to make sure nothing is broken. Maybe get you some pain medication. Are you okay with that? He stares at his hands and is quiet again. I don't know whether he has heard me or whether he is scared to talk about his eye in such a public setting. I repeat my question. Yeah, that's okay, he says softly. But I want to talk to my mom. She doesn't know I'm in here. I want to make sure she knows where I'm at. When can I call her? I don't want to talk to you no more. His words sting a bit. Well, how about we talk for a few minutes, and then we'll get you signed up for the phone. DOC controls it, so you just have to put your name on the list, and they'll call you when it's your turn. Well, where's the list? Who do I ask? He presses, clearly not interested in talking to me about anything. I'll show you when we're done, I say, frustration leaking into my voice. Come on, can we be done? He pleads. I still don't know much about you. I know, but I gotta call my mom. She's gonna worry. Okay, I finally concede. I'm not getting anything else out of him now. We can finish this afternoon. Let's go get you a phone call. We leave the day room and look for the officer in charge. My heart sinks. Officer Manor is a particular problem in our unit. Unlike the rest of the officers, she is just plain mean. She calls any patient who comes too close to her a crazy N-word. She acts as though the patients in the unit are part of a different species. Hi, Officer Manor, I cheerfully begin, approaching her perch on a cheap plastic chair next to the rec room. I'm busy, hold on, she replies in a gruff tone, taking what seems like a really long time to write something in her logbook, and she eventually looks up. Yeah, what, she snaps. This is Kevin, I say, pointing to him. He's never been here before and would like to call his mom. Can you get him on the phone list and explain how it works? Who are you, she asks, fixing Kevin with her eyes. I'm Kevin, he softly replies. Last name, she barks. He gives it and stands there, waiting for her to tell him what to do next. She writes his name in the book and turns away. What do I do now, he asks. You wait till I call you and you keep your mouth shut. That's Officer Manor, not me. I also keep my mouth shut and usher Kevin back to his room. They aren't all like that, I promise, I say. Just try to be patient. You're sort of down on the list, and it might take a while before your phone call, but you'll get it, I promise. He nods and sits on his bed. Everything in Kevin's room, in all of the rooms, is as suicide and weapon-proof as possible. The blue-green beds and cubbies, the only pieces of furniture, are made of thick plastic that can't be whittled into shanks. The beds are secured to the floor with tamper-proof screws, the kind that can't be loosened and swallowed. A thin, floppy mattress lies on the top of each bed, covered with rubberized fabric, stitched inside out so the threads can't be removed, and the mattress ripped into strips. There are no pillows allowed on the unit. The mattress instead is shaped so that there's slightly more filling at one end to be used as a pillow. Each patient gets one thin sheet, and in the winter, a scratchy gray blanket. I leave Kevin looking at the floor and go to the nursing station to write some notes. The front wall of the nursing station has glass paneling with a direct view of the 4 high observation rooms, located always visible and under more intensive observation than the other rooms in the unit. Kevin is in one of these rooms because he's so young. Adolescents are prime targets in jail for all kinds of abuse, from stealing a PIN code used to pay for phone calls to rape. We can't change the law that allows 16-year-olds to be in jail yet, but we did. But we can at least try to protect Kevin while he is here. I rifle through Kevin's chart looking for anything that will help me. I don't find much. A few sentences from the referring doctor saying that Kevin had stopped eating for a few days and wasn't leaving his cell, but there was no mention of the black eye. Within a few minutes, I hear Officer Manor shouting, "Stop coming to get me, you crazy kid. I said I'd call you when the phone was ready. Get back to your room and stay away from me or I won't give you your call. Just try me." I can see through the glass that Kevin is out of his room and looking confused. "But he's been on the phone forever," he says, pointing to Manuel, patient on the phone. Officer Manor smirks at Kevin while Manuel gives him the finger. Kevin skulks back to his bedroom. After another 5 minutes, he's out again. "I really need to call my mom," he pleads again. "You ain't getting no phone call now," she shouts, crossing his name off the logbook. "Get away from me." Kevin starts to get desperate. "Please, please, please, I need to call her. She doesn't know I'm okay." His voice is loud. "I said back off," Officer Manor yells. She marches into the nursing station. "This guy needs medication, now. He's threatening me." He was not. "Hold on a second," I say, motioning for the nurse to put away the syringe that she had reached for. She knows that she works for Bellevue, not the Department of Correction, and that she only takes orders from a doctor, and that we only use shots when there's a real emergency. But I've seen her side with the DOC on more than one occasion. I turn to Officer Manor. "What did he do?" She looks at me with venom in her eyes. "You saw him. He can't stay in his room. He keeps coming up at me. He tried to grab me. You got to get in some medicine. You hear me?" I walk a little closer to Officer Manor, feeling less afraid now, and more like a mama grizzly protecting her cub. "Yeah, I hear you, but he doesn't need medicine. Did he actually hurt you?" "No, but you know he's gonna. He's crazy just like everyone else here." My face is red and I'm trying to hold my tongue. "Let me go talk to him." "Forget the talking. Just get him the meds." "No," I say more firmly. "You're going to have to wait, and you have to get out of this nursing station." By the way, at this point, I don't have this in the book, but like, we were about to hit each other. Which is, please don't. I mean, that is, well, I have impulses to hit people. And this was one of the, God, I just can't, anyways, that's not in the book. Where was I? Oh, so she rolls her eyes, not moving. The nurse and another doctor stare at us, and as if on cue, the veteran Officer Brown steps in. "Hey, Manor, come on out. Let the doc talk to him. There's no need to get into it." He puts his arms on Manor and guides her out of the nursing station. She's calmer with him around. I follow behind and head to Kevin's room. Manuel is still on the phone alcove, talking as if nothing has happened. Kevin has closed his door by then. I open it to find him picking at his wrists with his fingernails, digging in and trying to make himself bleed. Hey, wait, how about you stop that?" I ask quickly, breaking the rule against entering a patient's room alone. I reach out to him just short of touching. Two nursing techs, one I've never seen before, and Alex, a muscular man from Grenada who works as many double shifts as possible to take care of his wife and young children, are suddenly next to me, and then next to Kevin, gently holding his hands at his side so that he can't hurt himself. Kevin doesn't resist. "Hey, Kevin, it's me. It's Dr. Ford. We met earlier." He has a glassy, unfocused stare, like he's off in another world. "It's okay, Kevin. She didn't mean—" "Hey, he needs the needle!" Officer Manor yells from the doorway, interrupting me. I whip around and snarl back. "Will you get out of here? You are not helping this situation." "Well, that ain't my job," she mutters and walks away. Kevin is more upset about his phone call than about what Officer Manor said to him. I head back to the hallway to clear my own head and see a crowd of officers by the nursing station, one of them wearing the white shirt of a captain's uniform. It looks like Officer Manor is being interrogated. The captain peels off when she sees me come out of Kevin's room. I don't know the captains that well since they aren't on the unit that much. "Dr. Ford, let's talk about this," she says, motioning me away from the crowd. "Sure," I respond, happy for a quieter place to talk and a person to talk to who isn't Officer Manor. I take a deep breath and stand up tall. "We have a 16-year-old patient who's never been here before, desperately wants to call his mom and tell her he's all right. I think he's really sick, but he won't talk to me until he's made that call. Then I relate my version of the events. Officer Manor completely provoked him. She's the reason he started cutting himself in the first place. She said that the inmate threatened her first, says the captain. She said he was about to hit her. I roll my eyes. Hardly. He was just asking for the phone. He might have been annoying, but he never threatened her. Actually, in the interest of time, I think I'm not going to continue. The story has a mixed ending, I will tell you. But as I'm reading this, I'm also thinking, like, you can hopefully hear how sort of desperate the situation is for Kevin, and also how difficult it is. And I have a sort of fighter, confrontational attitude, like, to begin with, and that doesn't always serve me well. But also how that kind of interpersonal interaction in these settings can really make things worse sometimes. And it's a daily effort to figure out, like, what's going to actually help someone like Kevin. It may not be me fighting with an officer. It may be some other thing. And you could read the book and find out what happens to him. I've never said that before, but I sort of like that. So even in that strange, traumatizing space where therapeutic goals are like more about what is the least worst, that is what we're trying to do. What's the least worst, not what is the best, because it's very difficult to reach the best there. But it is really possible for growth to happen and for, like, glimmers of hope to shine through. And I really firmly believe with everything I've got that those glimmers can grow and are growing brighter. I'm watching it happen in New York City. But I don't think I would have known what to look for had it not been for those patients at Bellevue. When you work in a place where no one wants to be, at least as a doctor, there's this paradoxical freedom in terms of treatment choices. No one's watching unless a lawsuit gets filed. Now, that can be a bad thing, right? No one is telling you the right or wrong way to do something. No one can give you any evidence to know that what you're doing makes sense. So there is not a diagnosis in the DSM, which is the sort of diagnostic manual for mental health issues. There's not a one in there that has been tested or researched on individuals who are incarcerated. Not one. And there are, for good reasons, there are real challenges for doing research on individuals who are incarcerated. The concept of consent and voluntariness is very challenging in a place where you have no freedom. But it does mean that it's a field that I have found where you sort of have to find your way, because there isn't great guidance anywhere about what to do in situations like this. And my experience has been that one of two things happen. Either the unit becomes a place of abuse and neglect, or the jail, because no one's watching, or it's a place where the whole community, all of the staff, kind of join together, sometimes metaphorically, but sometimes actually, to find their way to help the patients. And that is what happened at Bellevue. And I feel like that's what's happening at Rikers Island too. And it's really profound. And actually nowhere have I seen that happen more profoundly than during group therapy sessions. I was going to read some. I think I'm low on time, right, Sarah? Yeah, but I probably can't read a whole other thing. Oh, 10 minutes, that's not enough. I was going to read you something about group therapy from the book, but maybe not. But it's the experience of group therapy in jails is important for so many reasons. It models how to interact respectfully with all kinds of people, regardless of who they are, what they look like, what they believe, I mean, even what they smell like. It's profound. It allows people to feel vulnerable, however briefly, and vulnerability is something that everyone's trying to avoid in the jail and prison. Frankly, honestly, aren't we all sort of trying to avoid vulnerability in some way? There are very real risks to it in a setting like that. But it allows people to recognize that their struggles are not unique and that they are not alone. There is not a group I have ever been part of or have led where there aren't sort of nodding heads that go around when a patient brings something up. There's real shared experiences there. And sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with talking or the content or the particular activity of the group. It's just being in the same space with other people and not feeling threatened and not feeling isolated. In the group, I used to run a group that the patients named called Dealing with Jail. And I thought, oh, what kind of name is that? That's not like a very psychiatric name, but it was what we talked about. That was what we talked about in that group. And the patients brought up serious themes that were so profound. Like, should an individual, and dilemmas that I think they really struggled with. Should you be an individual in the jail, or should you join a gang and get protection? What's it like to feel deeply disappointed about how your life has turned out? What if the only place you feel safe is in the jail? Is there any way to get what you need other than fighting or injuring yourself or faking sick to get to the hospital? How do you live in a system where if you report something, you get punished? Whistleblowing, this was a common theme. Whistleblowing is usually worse than whatever the thing is that you could be reporting. Can you trust the doctors? Can you trust the medicine? No, not really. What if they're just trying to put you to sleep with all those meds? And one of the more common and heartbreaking themes, when you have mental illness, and this is what the patients say, when you have mental illness, people forget that you have feelings. They forget that you have pride and you have opinions and that you're a human being. You are fully defined by that illness in other people's eyes. And that has not been my experience at all dealing with these patients. And all of this is compounded when you're in jail. And you're really someone that people forget. So some of those topics and the hundreds of other ones that were brought up in the safe space of this group room that was in the back of the unit and had bars all over the walls, but had pictures as well of some like coloring book pictures for some of the less functional patients, and other paintings that honestly could have been galleries in that space. Those topics were discussed with such compassion and willingness to be open, even amongst patients who were otherwise paranoid or manic or violent. And I mean, it allowed me to be more open to hearing their stories as well, and understanding their pain, sometimes even their triumph. And it showed me, I don't know if I would have gotten this another way, how strong these patients are, and to focus on their strengths rather than whatever kinds of weaknesses people saw or that they interpreted. And I really feel like I've become much less of a psychiatrist in the classic sense of this word, and much more of a, well, I don't know what actually. Not a helpful companion through someone's journey through this trauma. Perhaps that's the best way to describe it. So writing the book was, now I guess talk about the book a little bit, but writing the book was my way of trying to make sense of the conflict between what the outside world seemed to think about the patients and the jail and what I knew to be true. I was also struggling to understand how the staggering statistics didn't really seem to be changing much. And they didn't seem to lead to the change that I thought they should. So there are 2 million people in jails and prisons, like triple that amount on probation and parole in this country. The rates of serious mental illness and suicide are multiple times higher than the community. The US spends $80 billion on incarceration, but the budget for SAMHSA, that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, is less than $1 billion. So we're spending 80 times more on incarceration than we are on mental health issues. That seems like that's in the wrong direction. But I do think the numbers can be difficult for a couple of reasons. So first, what do those numbers mean if we don't actually think that incarcerated people are valuable, and that they have potential, and that they're just as important as any other member of society? The neglect of the correctional system over our country's history is a testament to how much we as a culture value the humanity that is both detained there and works there. And so I think the first step has to be to actually care. I acknowledge if you haven't experienced it somehow, it is sort of hard to care. I expect probably you're not here if you don't already care. But the numbers are still completely overwhelming. And I think, God, this is way too big a problem to tackle. This is the crisis of our country right now. And if the big agencies aren't able to impact those numbers, what can I do? So it's just as I try to practice every day being like a respectful, kind human being, and that I fail at sometimes, I also think I'm just gonna quit. I'm gonna quit, and frankly, it'd be easier to live in Canada and not have to deal with all this stuff. But almost every day that I think that, I also will see a patient that I treated 5 years ago who will thank me for something that I thought was fairly insignificant in that treatment. Or I'll shake someone's hand and they'll say, you know, you're the first doctor to ever like shake my hand, ever. You're the first doctor to call me Mr. whatever the last name is rather than a number. Or I see patients encourage each other to stand up in front of a group and tell the stories. You know, these don't happen every day, but they happen enough that I don't feel so hopeless and I don't feel so traumatized and dejected when I think about working in this setting. And for me, at least, I have not been able to change my mind about anything unless I feel something deeply powerful and emotionally. I was probably a very obnoxious student. You know, I'd hear people lecture to me. I'd be like, I don't know if that's true or not. And I have to learn everything myself. Like, I have to experience it and feel it to know it to be true. And I do think that's also what makes it fairly challenging to really fully understand this problem. And the other thing is that I don't know that it's easy for everyone to think that they have something in common with a person in jail with mental illness, particularly someone who may be accused of a serious violent offense. It's hard to be curious about why you might hate somebody that you don't even know, or why you don't want to help them. It's hard to think that someone so unlike yourself can teach you something. And it's very hard to reach out and help when it might not be convenient. So I'm just going to close with a couple of thoughts about my own history as a psychiatrist. I was deeply ashamed about becoming a psychiatrist. Maybe I still am. I don't know. I'm not sure what that sigh was about right there. But I went to medical school to be a surgeon, which related to, there was another part of I used to live in the Bahamas and I would teach swimming, and there was a young boy who went under and I had to resuscitate him, and that experience led me into medicine and also led me into sort of thinking, wow, I want to do something where there's a really quick fix and there's life or death situations to navigate. But it turns out I don't like surgery. And I had some really profound experiences with the psychiatric patients at the medical school where I was training. It also happened to be a forensic hospital where we did our rotations. And so that exposure is what changed my opinion about psychiatry. But even then, I felt, even though I was like, this is what I'm going to do for my career, I was still ambivalent about it and had some kind of I'm not going to say hatred, but I don't know, I was internalizing some shame there. Psychiatry is still generally seen as a stepchild of medicine. And as we talked about earlier, therapy is really just not a generally acceptable practice, except maybe in these small urban pockets. So I came to the work feeling like a little bit of shame, and then think about people who work in jails and prisons. Their reputation is shifting, thankfully, but at the time when I was starting out, it was either people who were ill themselves, or people who couldn't get a job anywhere else, or people who were not American citizens and were trying to get into the country. That's the reputation it had. And I didn't think I was any of those kinds of, I didn't fit in any of those categories, and yet I had chosen to work with these patients that nobody else wanted to, and what did that say about me, and all sorts of stuff. And it's taken a long time. I think I'm comfortable now, with the exception of that sigh I just gave you, to come to terms with the work that I love, and I just honestly, I can't deny it. It's what I love to do. The patients are phenomenal individuals who teach me all the time, and I feel very lucky. I have also gained immeasurable help from my own therapy, and I was in a process group, actually I don't, how to define that exactly. It was a group that started in my residency and that continued until very recently, when everyone's kids got to a certain age where they were having trouble committing to an evening time, all 8 of us. But it went on for about a decade after residency. And that has helped me stay in the work. I don't have a therapist who's ever worked in a jail, and I don't think he'd know what to do if he stepped foot in one, but he really does help me understand like all that basic human interactional stuff that happens there, how it affects me. He helps normalize things for me, and frankly, he doesn't judge me at all. Well, I mean, at least that he tells me. And I just feel like I can let it all out there. And that's really helpful, because in this kind of work, you got to contain a lot. You got to contain a lot. So I think I'll stop there and take any questions, and just thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Anyone with a question, please come up to the mic. I do want to let you all know that the event is being recorded for educational purposes, so speak into the mic so your question can be recorded. And also, if anyone's interested in having the recording for teaching, you can talk with me after the event, and I'll give you my card, and you can email me, and you can have a copy of the film.
Dr. Ford, thank you so much for your presentation.
Sure.
I was particularly intrigued with your comment about the hierarchy of safety.
Yeah.
I don't study psychiatry. I'm actually an OB/GYN, but I did do my psych rotation at Bellevue, which is the tie that I really wanted to come hear you. But the hierarchy of safety, you mentioned that self-esteem was above love. And I thought that was interesting, if you can comment on that. Like, can someone not achieve self-esteem unless they have self-love or feel love from others?
So I am not an expert in this. The way I've interpreted that hierarchy of need is that you need to feel the love of another in order to be able to embrace. So, I mean, I feel like self-esteem is self-love, right? You need to be able to, we're a social society. We have mother-infant bonding that happens in our development. And I interpret it to mean that you need to experience that in order to be able to love yourself. There are probably other experts in this room who have interpreted that differently, but that's my version of it. And it makes sense to me psychologically. Oh my God, there's no more questions. Okay.
Hi, thank you very much
Hello.
for coming to Rochester. I have 2 more hours on your audiobook, and I enjoy hearing your voice much better, although the reader does a nice job.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you do a great job. So I am a city school teacher here in Rochester, and for 17 years.
Oh.
And so if I had to write the stories down, it'd be very difficult because I've buried them in certain spaces. So I'm curious how you went about backtracking, and I didn't know when the copyright was. I didn't know, so recently it was published.
Yeah.
So how those stories, I wouldn't know, I put them in safe places right here, and here, and here, and here. And so how you went about digging back?
That is a great question. I started writing in 2014 and had stored all the stories inside, just like you're describing. And actually, all the stories in the book, I should add, are amalgams of the same shared experience that multiple patients had. I wanted to be very careful to not do anything that would reveal the identity of any of the individuals, and was careful not to include anybody who'd ever been in the news that I was aware of. But I started writing after I left Bellevue and I had agreed to start at Rikers Island, but had a summer. I had a summer off, which I hadn't had in so long. And I started writing then because I mean, really as part of therapy for my own traumatic symptoms. I needed to somehow figure out why was I hurting? It felt like I was hurting myself in this work, and yet I was compelled to do it. And there were times when it was damaging to my marriage, and there were times when I wondered if I wanted my children to be watching their mother do this work and be crying and be upset and not able to read the newspapers. And it was sort of a crisis point, can I do this? And I wrote, putting it down on paper and almost like recreating the narratives, but with all the information that I didn't know at the time that these things were happening, and trying to make sense of the path that I'd chosen. I honestly, I felt like I needed to do it for my own mental health. And so I practically, I get up at 4. I'm like a very early riser person, but I go to bed super early, so don't worry about that. But I would get up before everyone was awake and write for a couple hours, and it soothed me. It helped me, it got me ready for the day, and I just did that for like a year and a half, and that's how it progressed. I was not, a publisher approached me about writing a book. I had no intention of ever putting these stories into a document, but by the time I was in discussions with a publisher that I thought was reputable and would allow me to write what I wanted and not edit it into some sort of sensational piece, I felt like I had something to say. And like I didn't see a whole lot of stuff out there talking about this kind of perspective. And so that's how it happened, basically.
Okay, I think we're moving on to the next. Oh, one more question, and then we'll have to stop.
Thank you very much. I want to make you aware, if you haven't already know about a woman named Dr. Robin Kasarjian. She's out of Boston. Mm-hmm. She's written several programs for the incarcerated person. And Houses of Healing is a program that is absolutely superb. And it's done here in the Monroe County Jail through Rochester Interfaith Jail Ministry, of which I am a volunteer. And what you speak is the essence of the way she has taught me to view people and to interact with people and to believe in their innate goodness. And prison ministry and jail ministry is something deep within me. And I just will end with, she has 4 spiritual truths. The first one is that I am loved and I am lovable. The second one is, my fundamental nature is good and beautiful. The third is, I am worthy of respect and acceptance. And the fourth, I am needed to help heal the world. And that begins with me. Healing me. And I take that with me into the Monroe County Jail and into 6 different prisons. And it's a message that strengthens me, but the places in your heart where you hold the stories of the pain that people live with on a daily basis. I am just honored to be in your presence. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you very
Monroe
much.
County should be honored for you. Thank you.
That's a beautiful way to end our talk. Did you have a question? Okay, we'll take one more and then we're going to stop.
Okay, Dr. Ford, I heard you on the Evan Dawson show say that mass murderers or people who are killing multiple people aren't necessarily having trouble with mental illness. And just from a lay standpoint, if we can help us figure out what are the alternative perceptions that's causing people to do something that most of us consider, the quote is, well, you have to be mentally imbalanced to do something like that. What are the alternative theories?
Yeah, so thank you for that, because the second that was out of my mouth, I was like, we need to unpack this more than you're going to let me unpack it in this. So the question was, is it true that all people who commit mass shootings, so that's killing multiple people at the same time, and school shootings are a horrific, tragic example of that, are they all mentally ill? And my answer to that was no, because actually not all of them have the mental illness, at least that we know of those who have survived or the ones that we have records of, have known mental illness. That is different, in my opinion, than having something that we don't, some other mental health issue or there's something, I do think it is deeply against human nature to behave that way. For those who have a diagnosable mental illness, that's what perhaps can be attributed to. But for the others, I don't know. I don't know what that is. I don't know what to call that. So that's the deeper answer to that. It's just that we don't have a name for what that behavior is, but it is deeply disturbed. I wish everybody could hear that who heard that show, but it's not at all to imply that that kind of behavior is, at least in my opinion, normal in any way, or sort of a result of sort of the way society has shaped an individual. It is, yeah, I don't think human beings were set up to behave that way naturally. Okay. Thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you.